Welcome back, Pokemon trainers, to the 2020 Portland Regional Championships. Yeah. My name's Gabby Snyder, finally here after a bit of a delay with Len, who's been here the entire day.
Yeah, we're going to rush you right off the plane and right into the game. Are you ready for some Pokemon?
I hope so. I mean, if not, I don't know what I'm doing here. But for now, we're going to jump into our next match featuring Kyle Livinghouse and Myles Kristalovich. I'm sorry, I'm looking at this name backwards, and I just can't read backwards. But Myles is, running a really interesting team of Lunala, Groudon, Incineroar, Bisharp, who I haven't seen in years, Tapu Fini, and Salamence, versus Kyle's team, which I think we've seen him run a few times at this point. Groudon, Xerneas, Kangaskhan, Tornadus, Incineroar, and Amoonguss. Sort of the classic Torn Kang, if you will.
Yeah, Bisharp is interesting, something we haven't seen so far today. Tapu Fini is another one that should be interesting to see how that combines in together.
Yeah.
And, of course, Kangtorn, we've seen a lot of it. I'm excited to see a little bit more. This one with Groudon, ready to set up Tailwind and get that big special Groudon off to a head start.
Yeah, it's such a cool team, and I really like how well Kangaskhan and Tornadus work together. It's very interesting to see just how that's sort of grown. After the North American International Championships into Worlds, and even now, it's very versatile. And against a lead like Incineroar and Tapu Fini, you have the faster fake out with Kangaskhan. So Kyle has an opportunity here to set up whatever he wants going into this game one.
Yeah, he can definitely get the Tailwind if he wants it. Already has the speed advantage against these Pokemon, so maybe not going to prioritize that as high. Also could be looking for some damage. Not too worried about the damage coming back at him, so it might be a good time to trade, start getting like a Double Edge or Z-Flying or Hurricane out. It's definitely some opportunities here.
Yeah, and it almost feels like he has to go for big damage right now in terms of this lead. Like, yes, he can set up Tailwind, but, without some of the faster Pokemon on the other side of the field, there's really no need. And I like this Protect from the Tapu Fini as we do see these the Kangaskhan Mega Evolve and presumably trade Fake-Outs with this Incineroar. This Tornadus is going to have a great opportunity to shut down Tapu Fini with Taunt, but, a good call from Myles going for that Protect. But overall, I think this is going to sort of set how this game's going to play out. Kyle, very offensive, probably going to start looking for, again, big damage, and I'm really curious to see what Myles is going to try to set up. Because you have to assume there's the Lunala and the Groudon in the back of his party.
Yeah, he gets through the turn of the Incineroar fake out there, just outspeeding and getting his own fake out. And now he's free to go after anything with a double target, right? We saw the Tapu Fini Protect. It's definitely going to be vulnerable. Something like a Double Edge and a Z-Flying. KO Tapu Fini and KO almost anything that would try to come into that spot. So definitely some big opportunities for damage here, but you can't just ignore that. You think you have a safe switch and think Incineroar is safe because that damage could go anywhere.
Yeah, but it looks like that Tornadus is carrying the Flyme Z Crystal that it's been known for, going to go for some big damage with, either a Supersonic Sky Strike, or it could have also been the Z Tailwind, but not as important in this matchup. I like the big damage here again. Like, Tapu Fini, I feel like it's one of those Pokemon, especially in the Ultra Series, that's notorious for being bulky, notorious for, like, trying to set up stuff like Icy Wind, maybe down on the Pokemon on Kyle's side of the field. So just the fact that he was able to get it into yellow without activating a Pinch Berry, if that's what it's holding, I think is going to be really advantageous for him. Kangaskhan as well, getting Incineroar safely down into the yellow, taking a Nature's Madness from that Tapu Fini in return, and Incineroar going to use this opportunity to go for a U-turn and allow Myles to switch something out. Now that the Z move is off the field, maybe he feels a bit safer about revealing one of his restricted Pokemon.
Yeah, definitely has an opportunity here to bring in Groudon relatively comfortably. Bear doesn't decide to double target either spot and try to pick up a KO, just kind of spreads that damage around.
Yeah, and I like that. I think that with Pokemon like Tapu Fini and Incineroar, that one of them, if not both, is going to be holding those Pinch Berries. So if you can get some big damage down and put them at that 40 to 30% health range so that you can go ahead and pick up a KO later without proccing the berry, I think that's really just, important to prioritize.
Yeah, so now we get another turn where Kangaskhan feels like a big damage threat, going to be offering some big Double Edges. Doesn't have to worry if he does a little too much of Double Edge at this point. It could just knock itself out. Tailwind starts to look a little more valuable. You see the Groudon on the other side. At some point, Kyle will want to get his own Groudon in and have the speed advantage there. So maybe before you risk just losing the Tornadus, you do go ahead and grab that Tailwind.
Yeah, it's interesting as well as we see Kyle switch out that Kangaskhan to reveal the Incineroar. That means he only brought one of those restricted Pokemon. So if it is Groudon, like you just mentioned, a Tailwind here would be beautiful because then you don't really have to worry about the possibility of the two Groudon, speed tying, and then entering that spot where, whichever Groudon gets the Earth Power off first will, knock out the other one, and then that's sort of how the game plays out. Myles revealing he also brought the Lunala on the field with him as well. Groudon going for a sun-boosted Fire Punch, but it does land on that Incineroar, and even though it's not very effective, it gets a crit and just goes for a amazing chunk of damage.
Yeah, gets a huge amount of damage with that critical hit Fire Punch.
With the sun.
Harsh Sun is so valuable. And yeah, Lunala comes in here, has to worry about Incineroar, but Incineroar is a little easier to worry about when you have chunked it so much with that Fire Punch.
Yeah, and the Shadow Shield ability is still active as well because Lunala hasn't taken any damage yet. But you have to wonder how Tailwind's going to play out in terms of these Pokemon speeds. Depending on what kind of Incineroar this is, and depending on how that Lunala's been trained, it might still be faster under Tailwind.
Maybe, but I would guess that Incineroar will be the second fastest thing on the field. Could go for something like a Hurricane and a Dark move, and so that gets respected, and Lunala leaves the field.
Yeah, and intimidating your opponent's Incineroar, I feel like, is always just a nice play to have. Incineroar, because this was the first turn it was on the field, could have gone for something like a fake out as well. So really interesting to note that the Tornadus decided to go for a taunt there into the Incineroar, which didn't activate because Incineroar is a dark type Pokemon, and taunt with Prankster just doesn't work on dark types. So I'm curious what Kyle was predicting from that Lunala. Maybe like a rivaling Tailwind or something.
It could have been the rivaling Tailwind. Could have been predicting Tapu Fini to come in and resist any dark move from that Incineroar.
That's true.
We've already seen that he values getting that Tapu Fini taunted. He tried it on the first turn of the game.
Yeah, and using the U-turn on Kyle's side of the field as well to safely rotate in that Groudon, but
not so safely.
Not so safely, actually, unless this Groudon has amazing agility and can dodge this Precipice Blades, but that does not look like the case. Still, though, with the Intimidate down on that Groudon, it turned Precipice Blades into a 2-hit knockout, so not the worst. Still okay, pretty bad, but not the worst.
Yeah, the timing of that's interesting. You might think that Kyle would like his Incineroar to have been just a little bit slower, but then it probably would have gone down to Precipice Blades itself. And so this way, at least, Incineroar does survive to be able to get another Intimidate off. Groudon gives up a big chunk of its health bar, but comes in with Tailwind up. But Incineroar's there, Fake Out is going to cost him another turn of this Tailwind, and then that advantage will be lost. And of course, like you said, Lunala's back there, Shadow Shield's there, and it could be a Tailwind at any point once that hits the field.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's really interesting that Myles hasn't been targeting down Kyle's Tornadus. Yes, it's a very frail Pokemon. It's most likely that a Fire Punch could knock it out in one hit, but the fact that it's being allowed to sit on the field for so long, essentially unthreatened, means that until it's gone, Tailwind is just going to be something that Myles has to deal with. Deciding to rotate in the Lunala for the Groudon spot, Hurricane does not connect in the sun, which is rare, but it occasionally will happen. And U-turn will do a little bit of damage into that Tornadus, gets a critical hit, and this is probably Myles' opportunity to get that Groudon back out onto the field if that's what he decides, or that Tapu Fini to sort of better handle this last turn of Tailwind we're going to be entering.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you pointed out that Tornadus is being left untouched. I think it's a smart move by Myles to basically force Kyle to play 1-on-2. This Tornadus is offering very little once Tailwind is already up. We saw that Hurricane miss in Sun. It's burned its Z-Crystal. There's not great targets for Taunt, and so it's just kind of sitting there taking up space. Meanwhile, that space it's taking up is making things much harder on Groudon, who would love to find the opportunity to get big attacks off, but was forced to protect on that last turn. And now doesn't have a great matchup here. Has to worry about Lunala just finishing it off from that low health now after having taken that Precipice Blades earlier.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the adaptations that some trainers have made in terms of dealing with this Kangaskhan Tornadus matchup. Knowing that Groudon's in the back of the party, and as soon as Harsh Sunlight's on the field, that Hurricane's accuracy is going to drop, I think really gives just an opportunity to just allow it to sit on the field and just hope those Hurricanes do not connect. Unfortunately for Myles, that did not work this turn, as Hurricane able to connect with the Lunala, remove the Shadow Shield ability, and then a overheat boosted by the sun. No special attack drops yet on that Groudon, was able to knock it out. Tapu Fini will get an Icy Wind in for all of Lunala's troubles. The speed stat of both these Pokemon on Kyle's side of the field is going to be lowered one stage, but that Tornadus could easily go for, again, the Prankster Tailwind, not have to worry about getting stopped unless Incineroar returns, and Fake Out is another option. And yeah, it's just it was kind of an interesting choice to bring in this Groudon. Maybe Myles is looking to punish the fact that Kyle. It's almost like he's boxed into this protect Tailwind play this turn. Unless
it's a solid play, right? It gives him back the speed advantage. I think that was a massive turn on the last turn to get a really clean free KO on Lunala. Of course, you had to get the Hurricane to hit at some point, but on the second attempt, gets it to land, and that overheat comes out with so much damage from the special Tyranitar, and just picks up the KO and takes a really big tool away, right? If that Icy Wind lands and lowers the speed, and then you match Tailwinds later, that Icy Wind is really valuable. Because Lunala went down so easily, and you're just going to give up the Tailwind to Tornadus here on the switch, that Icy Wind is going to be pretty meaningless in the long run.
Yeah, but Kyle, one step ahead it feels like here. Instead of going for the protect play, brings in that Incineroar so that Groudon loses the special attack drops, loses the speed drop from the Icy Wind, and also gets an Intimidate down on the opposing Groudon. So even though this Tapu Fini is going to be dealing some big damage here with the help of its Fairy Z Crystal, potentially targeting down that Incineroar, maybe hoping to finally just knock it off the field with a Twinkle Tackle. Tailwind is back up on the field, and Groudon's going to be able to come in pretty free and take advantage of it immediately starting next turn.
Yeah, I think this is kind of the optimal scenario for Kyle. He's going to get a Fake Out next to Groudon. Well, maybe not Fake Out, but he's going to have Groudon in with Tailwind up and ready to threaten a lot of damage. And no great answer back from Myles' side, right?
No great answer at all. And that's the downside, I think, of, losing your primary form of speed control in this format. When you're facing off against a Tailwind team, if Tapu Fini can comfortably remain on the field long enough to chain together enough Icy Winds so that your opponent is slower even after the Tailwind boost, I feel like, you can sort of play around it. But Kyle's been very smart. Not only was he switching his Pokemon around to ensure that, the stat drops didn't stick, he was able to manage his Tornadus well enough. He got the KOs where it mattered. And even though his Pokemon have very, very low health, assuming that he can connect an attack with this Tapu Fini and Groudon on Myles' side of the field, he should be able to clean up. And he's going to connect one attack at least, that Groudon going for a protect. Double Edge from that Kangaskhan will pick up the KO on Tapu Fini.
This is going to be important.
If this is the special Groudon that we're expecting and Kangaskhan doesn't knock itself out due to recoil damage, Earth Power should be able to pick up the KO on Myles' Groudon. I know that you can sort of train Groudon to survive it depending on how much HP and special defense you train in, but I feel like that's very rare right now in the format.
Yeah, definitely wouldn't expect it to be able to survive, but there's got that Fake Out threat you got to watch out for. Likely Kangaskhan doesn't have Protect, so there's still plenty of ways this can kind of go badly, right? The Groudon is low enough that it takes something like a Fake Out, then a Dark Move from the other Incineroar. It's going to be a problem. And so if all you do is get the Fake Out into Groudon and a Double Edge into the other Groudon, it's not going to be a game-winning play. But that's just a KO with the crit.
Yeah, if Fake Out can get you the knockout, we take those. And it looks like that Earth Power from the Groudon will connect with the opposing Groudon. It misses the KO, so that's great information for Kyle going into Game 2. But this Precipice Blades will connect with his own Groudon, knock it out, and Myles takes Game 1.
Yeah, well, a massive survival there. Wasn't able to find any chip onto Groudon at any point in the game, so that had to be an attempted full one-hit KO, and just misses it.
Yep.
I was kind of surprised to see the Fake Out not just go into the Groudon in order to deny that Earth Power, but Myles sitting there comfortably knowing that he could take that Earth Power, and if that was how the play played out, then he was going to survive it, get the Precipice Blades off, and get both KOs, even if the Fake Out hadn't already picked up the KO onto Kangaskhan.
Yeah, and I really like how Myles, he obviously knew that going into this tournament, and I think that's just the kind of preparation you need to have if you're going to be sitting at these top tables as the day progresses. If you know that your Groudon is bulky enough to take an Earth Power, play to that advantage, and that's exactly what we saw in this Game 1. Fortunately for Kyle, I think he does have ways he can adjust here. It was really interesting how things it felt like it was always Kyle who was switching. Myles felt pretty comfortable sitting around on the field, really only switching Pokemon out when he was worried about taking big damage. So I'm curious if we're going to see Kyle, maybe stop defensively switching a little bit, maybe go a bit more on the offense. And if he's able to score a couple of big knockouts early on, again, with that powerful lead of Kangaskhan and Tornadus, we might be seeing a very different Game 2.
Yeah, definitely adjustments available to be made. If he can just find the timing, not that game, Groudon had to come in 2 Precipice Blades.
Yeah.
It was more than half of its health. That's a really valuable health bar. That's where your big source of damage is coming from, that Groudon. And we saw the turns that followed in Tailwind. He was forced to protect, play more defensively because he didn't have the security of that big, full Groudon health bar. And so he didn't make as much use of it as he could have, and in the end, didn't have the damage he needed.
Yeah, we'll talk about adjustments. Interestingly enough here, we're seeing Kyle lead the Primal Groudon and the Kangaskhan combination against the Salamence, presumably Mega, and Tapu Fini on Myles' side of the field. So Salamence, does have access to Tailwind, and maybe that was the adjustment that Myles was sort of banking on. Rather than trying to use Lunala to potentially set up, that form of speed control, go with a Pokemon like Salamence, who I feel like Salamence is a little bit easier to maneuver than a Lunala, personally, but that might just be my own opinion.
Well, it's a great defensive option against all this King Tornadus stuff, because you get the fire offense, the ground offense, the flying offense when it has to be in sun is difficult. And so I think Salamence is pretty good at sticking around, especially because it also offers Intimidate. This Kangaskhan's Double Edge is not as much of a threat because of that. And so it's going to get a chance to do something helpful here.
Yeah, and Salamence very smartly not Mega Evolving this turn, maintaining that Intimidate ability so that if Myles decides to switch it out next turn, he might be able to cycle in the Salamence and this Incineroar and just really stack up those Intimidates on the Kangaskhan so it doesn't deal any damage. Kangaskhan targeting that Salamence with a Fake Out does not connect. Eruption from Groudon, still at full health, will do almost 50% damage to that Tapu Fini in the sun. So just, a very scary Pokemon to be contending with, but Tapu Fini is able to connect to the Icy Wind with both the Kangaskhan and the Groudon to drop their speed stages by 1 each, and there's no Tailwind to sort of offset that at this point, so definitely something that Kyle's going to have to start worrying about.
Yeah, it's a useful Tailwind, but it's a very high-cost Tailwind. It's easy to just pull that Groudon off the field now and reset the Icy Wind, but that's the kind of instant offense that Kangaskhan plus Groudon creates, right? There was no great alternate option for Myles to prevent that eruption from doing an enormous amount of damage. It had to hit something, so you want it to hit Tapu Fini, but you still lose 50% health.
Yeah, and it looks like we're seeing Kyle already, shrug off that Icy Wind speed drop on both the Kangaskhan and the Groudon, switching in an Incineroar, and I believe that is the Tornadus that we saw in Game 1. So potentially looking to match a Tailwind from this opposing Salamence, who is going to decide to Mega Evolve this turn. So Myles not worried about keeping that Intimidate ability for later. Could be an indication that he brought that Incineroar again. Will go immediately for that Tailwind, and Tapu Fini is the only Pokemon left on the field. No Z-move this time, just going for a Nature's Madness into the Incineroar, which is a great target for that. Since, Incineroar is so bulky, being able to drop 50% of its health in one hit is pretty useful. Yeah,
it's really great to clear all that health bar away. The Tailwind comes up, but kind of disappointingly timed where it'll be so easy for this Tornadus to just match it. You're not going to gain that much on this turn, having to play against a Fake Out and maybe Tapu Fini's offense. That first Nature's Madness is really useful, but where does Tapu Fini follow up after that?
Yeah, I like the Fake Out into the Tapu Fini here simply because, we're not going to see a Z-move into that Incineroar, and because that Salamence has been intimidated, the Double Edge isn't going to do enough damage, but that Tornadus revealing it has Icy Wind, not an uncommon move on these Kangaskhan Tornadus teams, but very interesting that we didn't see it revealed in Game 1 from Kyle, instead relying on those Hurricanes in the sun to try and deal that chip damage. Look, if I had to guess, we're going to see this Tornadus go for the Tailwind this turn just to try and get, again, a little bit of an edge over Myles's team, especially now that Salamence and Tapu Fini are getting closer and closer to knockout range.
Yeah, it's great to stagger those Tailwinds. Have a couple turns where you're matching and then a couple turns where you have the advantage. And it's also great to, if Tornadus is going to go down, to have it happen on the turn where you get the Tailwind, right? So you Icy Wind to have the speed advantage against these Pokemon, even once Tailwind is matched, and then you lose Tornadus for your own Tailwind if that's the path Kyle decides to go down, and so you get free entry for Groudon to again threaten those massive Eruption, some kind of Earth Power somewhere, and the opportunity to at some point get Kangaskhan back in and continue to really press forward with the match Tailwind, and then especially in your 2 turns of Tailwind advantage.
Yeah, and Myles switching out that Salamence for the Lunala here could be an attempt to try and save that Tailwind for later. Maybe once this Tornadus has been removed from the field, because we saw in Game 1, Tapu Fini was more than able to knock out that Tornadus from about 80% of its health thanks to the Z move. So, Kyle switching out that Incineroar to send in the Groudon here. Tornadus going for the Tailwind. I think this is him trying to set himself up for success, but if Myles can find a way to bring that Salamence back out onto the field once his own Tailwind has expired, maybe once a couple of turns of Kyle's Tailwind has passed, we could be seeing him just, kind of maintain that offensive pressure going into the later half of this game. Twinkle Tackle from that Tapu Fini, though, will be the move to deal some big damage to that Tornadus for the KO.
Yeah, it's a nice KO to get, but like I said, it might be something Kyle's kind of happy with, to just get a reset on this Tornadus slot, and then spending your Z move to get a KO that your opponent might just be okay with feels like a high cost. But Tapu Fini doesn't have great alternatives to get anything done that turn, right? It can't threaten the Groudon, couldn't really threaten the Incineroar, and so this at least does give the opportunity for plays like you talked about. If he both has the Lunala left with Tailwind and the Salamence left with Tailwind, there's definitely the option now in the late part of the game to get an unmatched Tailwind because this Tornadus is gone.
Yeah, and I will say, as someone who's sort of played around with Kangaskhan Tornadus, it just like you were saying, it feels like it's so much easier to maneuver things around when Tornadus gets knocked out after it uses the Tailwind.
Right, we saw in that first game, the Tornadus spent way too long on the field, and it really hamstrung Kyle. Not going to be a problem this game.
Yeah, Groudon switching in for the Lunala on Myles' side of the field, so, we're not going to see any cheeky knockouts on that Lunala this game, which I'm curious to see what kind of moves it has. We already saw the Z move revealed on the Tapu Fini, so it's probably not going to bust out the Menacing Moonrays Maelstrom, but still is definitely going to be a very powerful contender, as Kangaskhan going for Bite into that Groudon slot, looking to deal some super effective damage and break the Shadow Shield ability on Lunala, but instead, just only going to do a little bit of chip. Earth Power from that Groudon is enough to knock out Tapu Fini, and we don't get to see what it was going for that turn.
But you know what was missing in the last game? There's a little bit of chip on the Groudon. This Bite could be huge because now it sets up if something like Lunala has to come back in, you threaten the Bite there and you threaten the Earth Power KO. It's a huge change from last game where Kyle never found the opportunity to force Groudon to come into something small like Bite that would have given him the damage to actually pick up that KO in the end game.
And a very interesting switch in from Myles there, as the Lunala is the Pokemon that's sent out and not the Salamence. His Tailwind did just expire that last turn. I believe Kyle still has 2 turns more of Tailwind up on his side of the field. So it'll be interesting to see. I think this first turn probably going to be a little bit slow, maybe double protect, but after that, who knows? Myles has to sort of pivot in this Salamence somehow.
Well, I think the Salamence is in the back specifically because it is easy to bring in. You expect that Earth Power to go into Groudon. If Lunala's in the back, you're forced to bring Lunala into Earth Power. Now, you bring your Salamence into this Earth Power and get a free switch in for it. You're kind of baiting away one of these really valuable turns where Groudon gets to attack.
Yeah, well, we'll see if Kyle was able to predict that switch in as Mega Salamence is revealed on the field. Bite connects with Lunala, brings it down to about 50% of its health. Groudon, though, not going for the Earth Power, instead Eruption, boosted by the Sun, still basically at full health, is going to pick up a double KO, and Kyle should, with the 2-on-1 situation with this Groudon on Myles' side of the field, we might be looking at a Game 3.
Yeah, I think there's definitely... We're still going to get down to where both Groudons are at neutral speed, and we get to see which is going to move first and how much Precipice Blades does if that Groudon moves first and if it connects. Yeah, because I do expect the Groudon now on Myles' side will just protect, burn this last turn of Tailwind, but with 3-on-1, and all you have to do is get 1 Earth Power to get the win, it should be pretty easy. If Kyle wants to, we can also just find a fake-out play, and so that's why we see the forfeit.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I believe that last Pokemon on Kyle's side of the field was the Incineroar as well, so if you wanted to play it super-duper safe, you switch the Incineroar in for the Groudon, you get the Intimidate down, and then you just kind of play things out from there. So I think a smart forfeit from Myles, concealing the information about how these Groudons compare speed-wise, which I think, like you said, will come into play Game 3, because you look at Game 1 and Game 2, this matchup has really just been speed control, the matchup.
Yeah, it's really been critical, right? We've seen Icy wins from both sides, we've seen Tail wins from both sides.
Sometimes on the same Pokemon even.
Exactly. And whoever is in speed control is the aggressor at that moment, and the other person is on the back foot trying to find safe plays to just get through those turns, maybe steal some damage somewhere, but the player with the speed control is picking up KOs consistently, routinely, and so that makes the speed control so critical. What Pokemon we're going to need to see more from is Lunala, right? It's done nothing so far.
It really hasn't. It switched in a couple times. It's the pretty shiny variant. We saw that.
But at this
point, has no competitive aspect whatsoever.
At this point, it almost feels like just not having it, because we've seen value from Incineroar, we've seen value from Salamence, we've seen value from Tapu Fini. We've only seen 2 of the 3 of those in each of Game 1 and 2. If Lunala, because of the positioning, because it always has to worry about Bite or Eruption or getting taunted to prevent Tailwind isn't really offering anything, then maybe this is a position where you're forced to go to just one of your two restricted Pokemon and get enough utility surrounding that Groudon to win that Groudon matchup at some point. Because the player with the last Groudon standing probably going to win.
Yeah, and I think that would be a really smart adjustment for Myles. Lunala is arguably one of the most powerful restricted Pokemon in this format, but if you can't attack, you're better off using that slot for something like both the Incineroar and the Salamence. Again, have that double Intimidate to shut down the Kangaskhan, have that fake out utility on your side of the field, be able to switch in to take those Earth powers for your Groudon safely. I feel like that just offers so much more, and playing these Groudon-based teams as a way to support Groudon, especially when it's a Groudon versus Groudon sort of matchup, I think is really the easiest way to play it. And looking on Kyle's side of the field as well, we've seen 3 games so far. We've never seen the Xerneas. I mean, he could have made that adjustment. You never know. But Kyle's really been playing the support the Groudon game.
That's exactly what he's identified, right? He wants 2 fake outs next to it, and he wants the Tailwind next to it, and that's probably the same 3 pieces that Myles would love to have.
Yeah, and in that regard, it's going to come down to just how these Pokemon are going to be positioned on the field. So, looking at the leads, it is that Primal Groudon and the Kangaskhan, again, on Kyle's side of the field. Myles going back to Game 1 with the Tapu Fini and the Incineroar combination. So, Kangaskhan still has the faster Fake Out.
And that faster Fake Out is leading to immense offensive pressure immediately because he can always quick Fake Out Eruption and there is no counterplay. He's going to pick up a huge amount again on this turn 1 if that's what he decides to do because there just isn't an answer for it.
Yeah, and potentially, we saw that Eruption bring Tapu Fini down to half of its health. Even with the Fake Out, or the Intimidate on that Kangaskhan, it's very possible that something like a Double Edge Eruption would be able to pick up the KO on the next turn. No switching out on Myles' side of the field. Groudon safely going for an Eruption after the Incineroar's Fake Out is stopped by Kangaskhan. And that Tapu Fini, the last Pokemon to move on the field, will go for a Nature's Madness, targeting down the Groudon. So doing a nice job, potentially putting that Groudon into Precipice Blade's knockout range, but and weakening the Eruption, but it can still Earth Power the Incineroar.
It's a relatively high cost. I think it's a higher cost than the Icy Wind you paid in the last game. I think it's a good adjustment from Myles' side to prioritize that 50% damage over just the speed drop that was so easily reset in Game 2. But it's still a huge amount of damage, right? Both Incineroar and Tapu Fini, 2 really important bulky pivot pieces, lost 50% of their health right then. That's going to make it much harder for them to go out and come back in safely and still actually offer any utility after this point in the game. Because like you said, it's easy threat of Earth Power and Double Edge to put even more damage down on this turn that's going to force switches. Yeah,
well, Salaman's coming in onto the field with that Intimidate onto the Kangaskhan to potentially take an Earth Power from that Groudon. So, a really good switch. We know now that Myles did only bring one of his restricted Pokemon to this game, so another good adjustment on his side of the field. Tapu Fini going for a Protect this turn. Not going to take damage from Kangaskhan's Double Edge, and if it is the Earth Power into that Incineroar slot, so Myles doing a good job of mitigating damage, but he needs to find a way to go on the offensive if he wants to win this game.
Yeah, but I think this was the right first step to it. It's a really good turn to just pivot into something more effective. Now Kangaskhan is at -2 attack, not too much of a threat. Groudon doesn't have great targets for its offense at this point. I don't think you want to spend a turn of Groudon on the field just going for an Earth Power and Tapu Fini, so I'd expect it to either protect or switch, which gives a really nice opportunity for Tailwind here and to start taking the offensive advantage. Of course, we saw last time the Salamence found a place to Tailwind, all that meant was a couple turns of not much happening, and then Tornadus put up Tailwind, and it was that later Tailwind difference in that staggering that was so helpful for Kyle. So Myles has to make sure that once he gets the Tailwind with Salamence, he immediately is on the offense and makes the best use of it.
Yeah, interesting. We're going to see the Kangaskhan switch out for that the Incineroar on Kyle's side of the field. We're going to intimidate that Salamence, weakening those double edges that we saw in Game 1. So a good adjustment there. It's getting that Kangaskhan out of the way of danger, switching the Groudon out as well. So this will reveal his last Pokemon, which is going to be that Tornadus. So when we saw this back in Game 2, Myles was able to get Tailwind up this turn, but ultimately failed to sort of deal any damage to the Tornadus, and then it was able to just kind of sit around and wait until it was time. Instead of going for Tailwind immediately, instead going on the offensive with a Hyper Voice, dealing some nice damage to that Tornadus. And if this Twinkle Tackle connects with Tornadus, that's a knockout.
And
that's going to be huge.
Connecting either spot's really valuable. This turn shows the beauty of that pivot last turn, where Myles managed to find a way to take 0 damage, resetting the board position, and create such a good board position for himself that he forced a double switch that put down damage on Incineroar and KO'd Tornadus, giving him the tailwind advantage for the rest of the game. That single turn of just smoothly bringing in Salamence and protecting Tapu Fini took entirely control of this game.
Yeah, Kyle does have options to try and stop the Tailwind this turn if he wants to. He can go for a fake out into that Salamence from the Incineroar or the Kangaskhan if he brings it back out onto the field. But all Myles has to do is switch out that Salamence for his own Incineroar to mitigate that, and then just come back out onto the field once those fake outs have been burned and go immediately for that Tailwind.
Yeah, whenever you're now looking for all of your damage, if you're Kyle, to come from Groudon, right?
Yep.
Kangaskhan is going to get intimidated too frequently for it to be a huge source of damage, and you're going to be at a speed loss against the other Groudon that's just threatening Precipice Blade's back.
Yeah, in Kyle's advantage, Precipice Blades can miss, and that's something that might come in handy, later on in this game. But for now, Myles just, again, playing very defensively, very smartly, getting the Intimidate down onto the Kangaskhan, using Protect so that Salamence doesn't take damage from the Double Edge, and this U-turn is going to force that Groudon back out onto the field.
Yeah, this is a nice turn from Kyle's side. Gets Groudon back in, hasn't given up Tailwind yet, and it's going to have a little bit of play here, but still definitely playing from behind.
Yeah, and it's also really interesting to me that I believe this Mega Salamence is the fastest thing on the field right now. So, again, nothing stopping Myles from just clicking that Tailwind button if he feels that Salamence is threatening to be knocked out this turn.
Tailwind
or switching it.
Or the Double Edge button,
or the
right?
Double Edge, yeah.
The damage is going to build up onto the Groudon really quickly. If it takes a little bit of chip from somewhere else, or you just get the Double Edge as the first piece of chip and then look for something from Incineroar, if you get Tailwind, then that Incineroar is able to get those attacks off. That health bar, that Nature's Madness, way back on the first turn starts to look really valuable.
Yeah, and I like that you called that out because you're right. This Groudon really is the only thing on Kyle's side of the field that can deal damage, and sometimes your win condition is just as simple as removing the big damage-dealing thing from the field and then, just cleaning up afterwards. Myles going for a fake out into the Incineroar. Salamence finally going for that Tailwind, but Groudon will be free to attack this turn. Going for an Overheat. It is boosted by the sun. We haven't seen any other Overheat, so there's no special attack drops yet, but it's not very effective against that Salamence, and it's just not enough for a knockout.
This goes back to what I mentioned before, where Salamence is kind of pesky to this offense that Kyle's after, where he doesn't, in a lot of turns, really have any great way to hit it. Here, he wants to prioritize getting rid of Salamence. He recognizes the Double Edge is a big threat, the Tailwind is a big threat. But once you prioritize that, the best option he actually had was just that resisted Overheat, right? He gets 50% damage, but he gives up Tailwind in the process and doesn't get the KO and Incineroar that he could have had with Earth Power.
Yeah, and he is forced immediately to switch out that Groudon, because if you're a special Groudon stuck on the field with a 2-stage special attack drop, that's not going to help you either if you're the Pokemon that's supposed to be dealing a lot of damage. So, I do like this switch from Kyle. I think that having, fake out every single turn is going to help him buy enough time to sort of blast through this Tailwind from Myles' side of the field. But you're right, he still has to be very careful. That Groudon is still very threatened by all the Pokemon on Myles' side of the field, and it's just a really tough spot to be in. I think he really probably misses his own Tailwind right now, or even his own speed control, because both of those were on the same Pokemon. Once that Pokemon goes down, you're basically stuck with the speed you're at for the rest of the game.
Yeah, and now Myles has navigated his Groudon onto the field at full health with Tailwind. There is a fake out on Kyle's side to answer it, so I'd expect a fake out to go into Groudon, but there's a lot of nice stuff that Myles can do with the Salamence, too.
Definitely.
You can either pivot it back out to come in and get a Tailwind safely later. Nothing should be able to outspeed and KO it if you're not worried about fake out, so that Tailwind will always be there and available, the same way we think about the Prankster Tailwind. Or he can just start picking up big damage. Hyper Voice or Double Edge is valuable, but prioritizing making sure he has a safe Tailwind late in the game if he needs it.
Yeah, and I think I agree. I think that's a good prioritization on Myles' side of the field. One thing that we can note here on Kyle's side is that we don't really know anything about both of the Incineroar. We haven't seen any items revealed yet. We haven't seen anybody go for Protects or anything, so it's possible that both these Incineroars could be holding the Assault Vest to boost their special defense, but Kyle forced to switch out that Incineroar this turn so that he can have the fake out to bring back later. Going to fake out that Groudon so it doesn't deal damage, but again, just forced to slowly whittle down these turns of Tailwind.
Yeah, and all these turns, Kyle feels like he's having to use his fake out just to stay alive, right?
Yes, he really does.
He had to fake out Groudon there, not just to give up a massive amount of damage, whereas Myles navigates his Incineroar in the field where it's going to fake out to continue to apply forward pressure. Right now, this Kangaskhan is at a lot of threat. If it doesn't have Protect, the fake out's going towards itself probably, because the Precipice Blades is threatening the other Groudon, so you're either giving up Precipice Blades and fake out into Kangaskhan or into the Incineroar in the back.
All right, well, no fake out from the opposing Incineroar. The Precipice Blades will connect with this Kangaskhan and deal a big chunk of damage to it. Double Edge will fire back. Kangaskhan going to target down the Incineroar for that knockout. It gets it, but that recoil damage from the Double Edge will probably be enough to put it into KO range from something like a Hyper Voice from that Salamence. So Kyle did get to a point where he has the Groudon on the field. Tailwind is gone, and there's no other speed modifiers in terms of how these Groudons are going to interact. But Myles' Groudon still at full health.
Yeah, that was
and it took the Earth Power in Game 1.
Yeah, that was a really good turn for Kyle. I'm not sure exactly what Myles was looking for there. He ends up not faking out Kangaskhan, and so just giving up his Incineroar that still was going to give some utility. Maybe he just wanted Salamence out on the field, right? It's now the fastest thing again. Can threaten KO definitely onto Kangaskhan, and then you're looking at which Groudon is faster, or like we saw, Groudon a little bit low on health, took a fake out earlier.
A little bit.
That's probably the difference in what it survived Earth Power with last time.
I don't know.
So you're probably playing that game.
It's so tough. I mean, you also have to wonder, if it was a high or low damage roll, and, there's a lot that can go into how this plays out, but, it's a risk, and I think that's the thing that I want to focus on. It's not a guarantee. We don't know, again, how these Groudons interact speed-wise. We know that the Groudon on Myles' side of the field is probably on the bulkier side. But this Hyper Voice just barely missing the knockout onto Incineroar. Earth Power is faster. It connects with that Groudon, but was a fake out? Oh, it was. That fake out was enough chip damage to get that KO. And what a gamble. I mean, you have to wonder, Myles could have easily protected and gone for a Tailwind there.
But on Kyle's side, what takes a Hyper Voice, right?
Yeah.
You protect every time fake out's up. All these health bars have been cleared away. I've liked to see this board position before when playing with Salamence, right? You're definitely looking maybe that Incineroar can, and then maybe it can do enough damage back. If it has Flare Blitz with all this sun, that should be enough damage. Maybe he can navigate into 2 turns of Tailwind or of Fake Out in a row. But of course, you have to deal with Tapu Fini at some point too. I think he gave up Groudon, but he had gotten far enough ahead that at the moment where he gave up Groudon was like the first moment where he could give it up without losing the game, where I think now he can probably navigate to the end here. Kangaskhan is very low, Groudon is very low, and Incineroar is very low.
All right, well, Salamence going for that Protect on Myles' side of the field, possibly looking to Tapu Fini to help whittle down the remaining health on Kyle's side of the field. Overheat from Groudon goes into the protecting Salamence alongside of that fake out from the Incineroar. And Icy Wind from Tapu Fini will lower speed by 1 stage for both these Pokemon here, and is enough to just knock out the Groudon outright. Incineroar still holding on, but it's a very tough spot for Kyle to be in. This Kangaskhan's going to come in. But it's in the yellow.
I think that knockout was actually very good for Kyle, right?
It allows him to get in the fake out safely.
Right.
So he does have 1 turn where the Salamence cannot guarantee the Protect.
If he doesn't get knocked out there, right, the Hyper Voice comes in and just knocks out both of these Pokemon in the next turn. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Now you can fake out the Salamence. You can attack the Salamence again with Incineroar. Yes, you probably still don't quite beat this Tapu Fini because of how low your health bars are, but there's a path forward, whereas I think the Hyper Voice win condition was just there if Icy Wind doesn't pick up the KO.
That's true, and you do have to wonder, I mean, that Icy Wind did so little damage to the Incineroar. If Kyle is able to knock out this Salamence, which it looks like he should be able to find a way through to that, it's possible that, 2 versus 1. Yeah, or just outspeeds. And knocks out that Kangaskhan with a Moonblast. So another move concealed until the absolute end of the game. Flare Blitz will connect with that Salamence, but it will do enough to knock it out as well. But that recoil damage is going to put Incineroar closer and closer to getting KO'd. And, even if it does hold on this turn, that Tapu Fini is now confirmed to be faster than the Incineroar. So
Moonblast will just finish it at this point. It became a little interesting at the end there.
Yeah, yeah.
Things became more difficult than they needed to be, but in the end, the Tapu Fini has the biggest health bar left, and it's just going to end this game.
Yeah, and that's all you need sometime. I really like how Myles played that. He's able to keep his cool. He was able to manage his speed control, and having Moonblast revealed on that Tapu Fini so late on. It's possible that he was using Moonblast to do the Z move, with the Fairy Z crystal.
Yeah, I'd assume it was basically revealed already because of that Fairy Z.
Yeah, and how much damage it did.
It's really the only option to enable it. Dazzling Gleam, not a very common Tapu Fini move.
No. But still, just the fact that he didn't reveal that there was the Moonblast there, I think that was just good sort of information keeping. Yes, he revealed the Z move, but he saved that very powerful move on Tapu Fini for the situation where Tapu Fini needed to use the very powerful move, and I think that's just really good board management.
Yeah, I think he also did a good job at recognizing the point, which he didn't have to abandon all to save the Groudon.
Yeah.
I think if I was in his shoes, I probably would have done more than I needed to, trying to keep Groudon alive, to not allow that risk of Earth Power just KOing.
Yeah.
But he recognized that his board state was so much better, that the Tapu Fini was still healthy in the back, and with the options that would be left, once Groudon was forced that low, he could win the game. So he allows the Earth Power to come in and KO Groudon because it meant Salamence became a huge problem, right? We saw that Hyper Voice that came out on that turn pushed Kyle into a corner where he kind of had to abandon everything else except focusing hard in on just getting rid of the Salamence to the point where Tapu Fini was there to win the game.
Yeah, and I really like the Salamence adjustment from Myles in general. It had just such a good matchup against the way Kyle was playing his team. Maybe if Kyle rotated in that Xerneas, we might have been seeing a very different game 3, but, just making the correct call. My opponent's been relying heavily on Groudon. I know it's the special variant, so it does win that 1v1 if it gets to it, but...
Remember all the way back to that pair of turns where Groudon used a turn where it had advantage and momentum to overheat a Salamence for 50%, and then immediately have to switch off the field because it lost its special attack. That was the effect Salamence was having on the game, where it took all of that momentum and all that wind out of Kyle's sails because he had to spend everything he had for that, which was not very much.
No, it wasn't very much at all, but, just a really fun game to watch. It's so exciting to see, these battles still being so close, even though we've been playing this format since March of this year. And it feels like it's just a really great way to sort of send the format out on. We're still sort of figuring out the game. We're still seeing these amazingly close matchups, and it's just so exciting to watch.
For sure.
So that's it for us from Round 5 here in Portland. We'll be back soon with more Pokemon action, so please stay tuned.